They called me selfish when I stopped waiting for them. My parents skipped our Christmas reunion for a luxury trip with my sister, then laughed when I threw a dinner by myself. So I gave myself the only gift I could trust, a $3 million villa overlooking the Pacific. One post, one caption, and then 200 missed calls. Now they want to share what they never built. I'm Madison Cole, and this is how peace became my perfect revenge. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. San Diego, December 2023. The city was glowing with holiday lights, the kind that made every window shimmer, even mine. I stood in the middle of my living room holding a box of glass ornaments that caught the reflections from the Christmas tree. It was the first Christmas reunion I'd planned since my divorce 2 years ago, and I wanted it to feel warm, peaceful, maybe even happy. I hung each ornament carefully one by one, trying to picture my parents sitting across from me, my sister Emily, laughing, the four of us pretending that everything was fine. I could almost smell Mom's cinnamon rolls, hear Dad's low voice telling one of his stories. For a second, I believed they'd actually come. I set the table for 4. Crystal glasses, red wine, my grandmother's old china. I lit the candles and watched the flames dance. Then I dialed my mom's number, smiling as I waited for her to pick up. "Hi, Mom. Just calling to make sure you got my message about Christmas dinner. I thought we could do something small this year, just us." There was a pause, then her voice came through, light but cold. "Oh, honey, didn't your father tell you we're going to Europe with Emily? She needs a break from work, poor thing. Paris this year, can you imagine? It'll be good for her." My smile didn't even have time to fade before my stomach dropped. "You're not coming, well, you know how your father is," she said, lowering her voice, as if I were an outsider in my own family. He thought we all needed something different this Christmas. In the background, I heard his voice, steady and familiar. "Is that Madison? Tell her not to waste money on those dinners. Nobody wants to sit through another one of her show-off parties." The phone slipped in my hand. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. "Don't organize another one of those boring dinners," he said flatly. "You've got better things to do, don't you?" I swallowed hard. "Sure, Dad. Have a nice trip. Don't sound so dramatic," Mom added quickly. "You can come next year. We'll plan something." "Yeah," I said. "Next year." The call ended, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at the glowing tree. The reflection of the lights flickered in the wine glass on the table, bouncing across the empty seats I'd set for them. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my voice, but the silence was heavier than I expected. The kind of silence that reminds you just how small you are when no one's looking. I walked to the stereo and switched the music off. The soft sound of Bing Crosby faded mid-verse. Outside, artificial snowflakes swirled through the air. They weren't real, but for a second they fooled me. I opened the balcony door and stepped out. The cold air hit my skin sharp and cleansing. I could see families across the street, laughter silhouettes around a dinner table, children running past the window with candy canes. Inside, the candles burned low. The wine tasted too sweet. I sat down on the couch, still in my red dress, watching the lights blink on the tree like a heartbeat that refused to stop. It wasn't the first time they'd chosen Emily. When we were kids, she got the new bike, I got Dad's old one. She got praised for her creativity, I was told to be practical. Still, I'd hoped Christmas would be different this year. I thought time could heal what pride destroyed. I looked around the room at everything I'd done to make it beautiful. Garlands on the mantel, the smell of pine and vanilla candles, the perfectly wrapped gifts under the tree. None of it mattered now. I poured another glass of wine and leaned back, closing my eyes. If they think I throw parties just to show off, I whispered to the empty room. Then maybe they've forgotten I only wanted someone to sit with me. The clock struck 9. Across the city, people were clinking glasses, unwrapping gifts, laughing. I could almost hear the echo of their happiness. A gust of wind brushed through the balcony, making the tree lights flicker. I stood, walked to the stereo again, and turned the music off completely. The silence filled every corner, and I let it. I took one last look at the dinner table, the untouched plates, the 4 empty seats, and then blew out the candles. Smoke curled upward, disappearing into the air. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself tired, alone, but still standing. My lips pressed into a faint, defiant smile. "Next year," I said to no one, my voice steady now. "I won't invite anyone." The lights on the tree shimmered softly behind me. As I walked toward the balcony, the sound of waves faint in the distance. The night had settled in for good, and I let it. A week after Christmas, Harbor Capital was already back to full speed. The holiday lights that had covered downtown San Diego were coming down, and the city was sliding back into its usual rhythm, busy, sharp, and detached. I got to the office early before the sun had burned the fog off the bay. My desk was stacked with reports, my inbox overflowing with client summaries. Routine was good. Routine didn't ask how your Christmas went. I opened a spreadsheet, checked numbers, recalculated margins, and tried not to think about the tree still standing in my apartment, its lights unplugged, gathering dust. Every cell, every figure was another wall I built between myself and that hollow silence from a week ago. By 8:30, the office was buzzing. People returned from vacations laughing about ski trips and family dinners. I nodded, smiled when necessary, but my eyes stayed on the screen. Then David Allen, our CEO, walked in, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and a reputation for running his company like a chessboard. He stopped at my cubicle holding a thick folder. "Madison," he said, "you got a minute?" I followed him into his glass-walled office. The view of the harbor stretched wide behind him. "I've been reviewing candidates for the national CFO position," he began, flipping open the folder. "Your name keeps coming up. You've got the experience, the numbers, the track record." But he closed the folder softly. "You also know this role requires more than numbers. It's about visibility, and no personal distractions, no scandals, no stories outside these walls. You understand what I'm saying?" I nodded. "I do. My work speaks for itself, David." "Good. Keep it that way." His tone was neutral, but his eyes lingered. "I'm rooting for you." Back at my desk, I felt the mix of pride and pressure settle in. David's warning wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder that one wrong move could undo everything. That night, Samantha Torres, our HR director, and my closest friend texted. "Drink. Tonight. You need it." We met at a small bar in La Jolla, tucked behind a bookstore. Warm yellow lights jazz from the corner, the smell of whiskey and lemon peel. Sam was already there nursing a martini. "To surviving the holidays," she said, raising her glass. I laughed, clinking mine against hers. "Barely." She leaned forward, her expression soft. "I saw your post last week. The tree, the dinner setup. I can't believe your parents skipped out on you again." I swirled my drink. "They had better company. Europe, apparently." Sam's eyes narrowed. "You keep expecting them to be different. They won't be. They're still my parents," she smirked. "No, they're just older people who still think they can tell you who to be." "That's not the same thing." I smiled faintly. "You sound like my therapist." "Maybe you should listen to me then." She tapped the rim of her glass. "You don't need their approval, Mads. You're doing fine on your own. Better even. Live in a way that makes them look up to you instead of down on you." Her words stayed with me after we parted ways. I drove along the coast, the Pacific glittering under the moonlight. Traffic was light, and for the first time in days, I let myself breathe. At a red light, I checked my phone. A new message from one of my colleagues. "Todd, from Finance. Heard you're applying for CFO," it read. "Just remember, Harbor Capital doesn't need another show-off." My jaw tightened. The screen glowed in the dark, his words burning through me like acid. I pulled over the car, idling beside a billboard advertising oceanfront homes in Malibu. The picture showed a glass villa overlooking endless blue water. The slogan beneath it read, "Own what no one can take away from you." I stared at it for a long time. Maybe it was impulsive. Maybe it was exactly what I needed. I thought about my father's voice calling me a show-off, about David's warning, about Sam's advice. I thought about that Christmas dinner table I'd set for 4. They all saw me as someone who had something to prove. Maybe I did, but not to them. If they think I'm showing off, I thought, then I'll show them what real success looks like. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Sam's contact, and called. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said, my voice calm but deliberate. "You mentioned your friend Nathan the architect, the one who designs coastal homes?" "Yeah, Nathan Brooks. Why?" "Give me his number," I said. "I think I'm ready for something new." There was a pause, then a smile in her voice. "New as in I'm done waiting for invitations." The wind from the ocean rushed against my car window as I ended the call. The billboard lights flickered in the distance, the ocean whispering somewhere beyond the road. I started the engine, merging back into the quiet stretch of highway, the decision already made. Tomorrow I would call Nathan Brooks, and this time whatever I built would be mine alone. The Pacific Highway shimmered under the afternoon sun as I drove north toward Malibu. The radio played softly some old Fleetwood Mac song, and the ocean stretched endlessly beside me. Calm blue, indifferent. I rolled down the window, letting the salt air fill the car. It smelled like freedom. Nathan Brooks was waiting in front of a gated driveway when I arrived. He looked exactly how I imagined an architect might, casual button-down rolled sleeves, sunglasses hooked on his collar. When he shook my hand, his grip was steady warm. Madison, right? Samantha told me you were interested in something oceanfront. That's right, I said, taking in the row of white villas along the coast. I want spacelight, something I can breathe in. He smiled. Then you came to the right stretch of sand. We walked through the gate and up a stone path lined with lavender. The house stood at the edge of a cliff, white stucco with glass walls facing the sea. The sound of waves echoed through the open patio doors. Inside sunlight poured across marble floors, lighting up every corner. The listing price is $3 million, Nathan said, sliding his hands into his pockets. But the owner's moving to London. He needs it gone fast. I think this place was waiting for the right person. I laughed softly. You sound like a realtor. He grinned. No, I'm the guy who makes houses breathe. But this one already does. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out. The horizon was endless sky melting into sea. For a moment, I saw my parents raising their glasses in Paris. Emily snapping selfies at some restaurant, all of them smiling without me. Yes, I said quietly. I think I'll like it here. He gestured toward the terrace. Want to see the pool? Outside, a narrow infinity pool seemed to spill straight into the ocean. A breeze lifted my hair, carrying the sound of gulls and waves. It was the kind of silence that felt earned, the kind you couldn't buy, but maybe you could build it. Back inside, Nathan handed me a folder. If you're serious, I can connect you with a broker I know. He's discreet. I'm serious, I said. Later that week, I sat in a bank office downtown, filling out forms under fluorescent lights. The loan officer, a man in his 40s with a polite smile, asked for proof of income. We'll just need your last 3 pay stubs, tax returns, and verification from your employer. Of course, I said, though my hands trembled slightly as I reached into my folder. I'd built my career on numbers, but signing for something this big felt personal in a way spreadsheets never did. Nathan stopped by halfway through the appointment, leaning against the doorframe. Everything okay? I nodded, just nervous. He smiled. That's normal. Big steps should scare you a little. When the paperwork was finally approved, I felt the kind of relief that comes with permission. To start again, to prove to yourself that you can. Afterward, Nathan and I stopped for coffee at a small cafe overlooking the highway. The sun was beginning to set, streaking the sky with orange and pink, so he said, stirring his drink. Why this house? I mean, people buy property for all kinds of reasons. Investment, retirement, ego. What's yours? I looked at him then out the window where the ocean shimmered below. To remind myself, I don't need anyone's permission to be happy. He nodded slowly. That's a good reason. We talked about architecture music, nothing in particular. He told me he left a big firm years ago because he was tired of building things for people who didn't care about them. I told him I understood. I used to think success meant being seen. Now it meant peace. By the time I got home, the contract was ready. The broker emailed the final version that night. My hand shook a little as I signed the weight of $3 million, pressing down and lifting off at the same time. Fear and pride danced together in my chest. I didn't tell anyone. Not Samantha, not my coworkers, certainly not my family. The house was mine, and for once, that was enough. The next weekend, I drove back to Malibu with a bottle of champagne and my camera. The sun was sliding into the water, painting the glass walls in gold. I stepped out onto the terrace, kicked off my shoes, and listened to the waves crash below. I opened my phone and snapped a few photos. The pool, the view, the sunset spilling across the living room. The light caught my reflection in the glass, a woman standing alone, but not lonely. I scrolled through the pictures, choosing one where the sky looked like fire. I uploaded it to Instagram with a caption that came to me without thinking. The only Christmas gift I needed. For a long moment, I watched the post go live, the likes starting to flicker in. Then I locked my phone and set it down. The sound of the ocean filled the silence. I leaned on the railing, watching the horizon fade into twilight. I used to want them to be proud of me. Now I just wanted to be proud of myself. The waves kept rolling in steady and calm as the last light of the day disappeared into the sea. The first thing I heard was the phone. It wouldn't stop ringing. I opened my eyes, sunlight bleeding through the curtains, and reached across the nightstand. The screen glowed bright. 217 missed calls. My notifications were stacked, buzzing in waves. Mom, Dad, Emily, unknown numbers, even a few colleagues from Harbor Capital. The first message at the top was from my mother. What house? Where did you get the money? Did you take a loan? Call your father right now. The next was from Emily. Wow. Really classy, Maddie. Couldn't even tell your own family. You're unbelievable. I sat up, the sound of waves rolling just beyond the balcony. My phone kept buzzing on the sheets like it was alive. I turned it face down. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the ocean. I made coffee and walked out to the terrace. The air was cool, sharp with sea salt. Below, surfers were dots moving along a line of white foam. The horizon stretched endlessly calm and blue. 1 year of silence, and now they couldn't stop calling. I sipped the coffee, scrolling through the headlines that were now everywhere. Harbor Capital's CFO. Flaunts 3M'd under Malibu villa. Another one independent woman or out-of-touch heiress. There was even a photo of me standing on the balcony at sunset, the same one I'd posted the night before. I almost laughed. All it took was a picture. The phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang a second time, and this time I answered without thinking. Madison. It was David Allen. My CEO. His voice was calm but clipped. I assume you've seen the news. I have, I said, glancing toward the ocean. Good, then you also know what not to do. Don't post anything. Don't comment. Don't even like a post about it. The internet will move on if you don't feed it. Understood? I said. He sighed. This kind of publicity isn't ideal, especially with the national CFO review coming up. Keep your head down for a while. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't the one making a spectacle of it, that I'd only shared a photo of my house, not a scandal. But I stayed quiet. Got it, David. After we hung up, I set the phone on the counter and let the coffee grow cold. I wasn't angry yet. I was still in that numb space between shock and disbelief. Then another buzz. Another text. Dad, this time. You need to share the property with your sister. She's getting married soon and doesn't have a home yet. As her older sister, you should help her get started. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering above the reply button. Share. They hadn't even shown up for Christmas dinner, hadn't spoken to me in months, but now suddenly I was supposed to hand over my house because Emily needed it. I could feel the heat rising behind my ribs, slow and sharp. They never shared anything with me. When Emily got her first car, it was new and red with a bow on top. Mine had been Dad's old truck that coughed every time I turned the key. When she failed an exam, Mom comforted her with ice cream. When I aced one, they said, that's expected. Now they wanted to share. I laughed, quietly, bitterly, and set the phone down again. The sound of it hitting the counter was louder than I expected. By mid-morning, my name was trending on social media. Hashtag Malibu CFO and Christmas Villa were everywhere. People debated whether my post was inspiring or arrogant. I didn't care. The truth was, I hadn't posted to impress anyone. I'd done it because the house made me feel free. Still, the comments crawled under my skin. She must come from money. 3 million must be nice to show off during a recession. This is why rich people are disconnected. I closed the app and stared at the water. The sky had started to cloud over a gray film spreading across the horizon. It felt fitting. Around noon, I got another text from Emily. Dad's right. You've changed. You used to care about this family. I typed out a reply. Something cruel. Something true. But deleted it before sending. Instead, I put my phone on silent and went for a walk down the beach. The sand was cold under my feet, the wind pushing against my hair. Families dotted the shoreline, kids building castles, couples laughing, people who didn't have to explain themselves to anyone. They only call when there's something to take. That thought stuck in my head like a song I couldn't stop humming. When I got back to the house, I turned the phone back on. The number of missed calls had jumped to over 200. Messages kept coming. Mom. Dad, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me since college. I scrolled through the notifications, then stopped on one more message from my father. I raised you to know what family means. Don't disappoint us further. I stared at it until the words blurred. Disappoint them further. What was left to disappoint? Opened the photo app, looked at the picture of the sunset I'd posted the night before. The house glowing gold, the sky bleeding into the sea. It was still beautiful. Still mine. I opened Instagram again, hit add to story, and typed in white letters across the same picture. I'm not sharing anything. Except peace. Then I hit post. For a long while I just sat there, the sound of waves breaking softly below the cliff, the air smelling faintly of salt and rain. The world could talk. The internet could spin. My family could call 1,000 times. I'd already made my choice. By late afternoon, the sky over Malibu had turned the color of pewter, heavy with sea mist. I was halfway through reviewing a quarterly report when the doorbell rang. The sharp, insistent chime startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my parents were standing there. Robert in a navy blazer, his tie slightly crooked, and Margaret clutching her purse like a shield. Neither of them smiled. Mom! Dad! I stepped aside, but my tone made it clear they hadn't been invited. You didn't call. We didn't think we needed an appointment to visit our own daughter, my father said, brushing past me into the living room. Mom followed her heels, clicking against the hardwood. We were already in the area she lied. Her eyes darted around the open space. The panoramic windows, the view, the glass staircase, as though taking inventory of everything that didn't belong to her. Dad dropped a thick folder onto my marble coffee table. Let's talk about this. I stared at it. What is that? The family trust, he said. Flatly. This property was purchased with funds from it, wasn't it? I blinked, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. What? No. I paid for this house with my salary and savings. Every dollar came from my work. He crossed his arms. You expect us to believe that you alone could afford this place, $3 million. Come on, Madison. I'm the director of finance at Harbor Capital. I said, my voice sharper now. You have no idea what I make because you've never cared to ask. Mom stepped forward, trying to sound soothing, though her tone dripped with condescension. Emily's wedding is coming up, and she and Derek are struggling to find a place. You have this beautiful home. Maybe it's time to share a little, dear. Families help each other. I stared at her. Share. You mean give away? Like how you shared the new car with Emily when I got Dad's old truck, or how you shared college funds after paying hers in full, but told me to figure mine out on my own. Her face stiffened. You're still holding on to that. You were always so dramatic. Dad's voice cut through the air. Enough. This attitude of yours. This obsession with keeping score. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing, I said, taking a step closer. You're standing in my house uninvited, accusing me of stealing money that never existed. You ignored me for a year, skipped Christmas, and now suddenly care because I own something you don't. Mom's expression hardened. Don't twist this. We're trying to make things fair. You've always had more opportunities than Emily. I laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Fair. If fairness means taking from one to give to another, then yes, I'm jealous of your version of it. The air between us tightened. I could hear the waves crashing below the cliffs outside, steady cold. Dad took off his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose like he was the one suffering. You're making this family look bad. People are talking Madison. They're saying you've changed. I said, I stopped apologizing for existing. His head snapped up. You're ungrateful. We gave you everything. I met his eyes. You gave me a lifetime of being compared. That's not everything. He slammed his palm on the table. Enough. Mom flinched but didn't speak. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. If you came here to yell at me, you can leave. This house isn't open for negotiation. Mom straightened, her tone clipped. You can't talk to us like this. I can, I said quietly. And I am. For a moment, no one spoke. The ocean filled the silence again, relentless and distant. Dad leaned closer, his jaw tight. You're going to regret this. You think this, he gestured around the room, makes you untouchable. You're making fools of us. I didn't move. Maybe you should stop caring what other people think. He took a step toward me, voice low. I won't have my daughter destroying our family's name. My pulse quickened, but I stood my ground. You did that yourself when you decided image mattered more than love. Mom grabbed his arm. Robert, let's go. He resisted, but she tugged harder, sensing how close he was to losing control. She turned to me, her voice trembling between pity and fury. You've become so cold, Madison. So self-centered. I looked her straight in the eye. No, I just stopped begging for scraps of affection. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I walked to the door and pulled it open. The sound of the sea rushed in. You should go, I said. This is my home, not a courtroom. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Mom exhaled shakily and nudged Dad toward the exit. He hesitated, glaring at me with something between anger and disbelief. Don't think this is over, he muttered, brushing past me. I'm counting on it, I said. They stepped outside the door, closing behind them with a dull, final sound. The silence that followed was thick. My reflection wavered in the glass door. Hands trembling, chest rising fast. I leaned against the frame, letting out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The house felt enormous again, every echo amplified. The folder they'd brought still sat on the table. I picked it up, flipped through a few pages of photocopied trust documents, and then dropped it into the trash. I stood there for a while watching the sunset smear orange light across the ocean. My hands were still shaking, but my voice inside had gone quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just steady. They'd come here trying to reclaim control. Instead, they walked out with nothing. Outside, the waves kept rolling in. I walked over to the window, staring at the reflection of my own face against the fading sky. My breath fogged the glass for a second, then disappeared, like they'd never been here at all. 2 weeks passed before the letter arrived. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope stamped with the seal of the Los Angeles County Superior Court. My name was printed neatly across the front Madison Cole defendant. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot, holding it between my fingers like it might burn. For a moment, I considered tossing it straight into the trash. But curiosity, or maybe defiance, won. I tore it open. It wasn't junk mail. It was a lawsuit. Robert and Margaret Cole versus Madison Cole. Petition to establish co-ownership of real property Malibu residence. I read it twice before the words settled in. My parents were suing me, over my own house. The claim said the property was acquired through joint family funds derived from a long-standing family trust established in 2015, in which the secondary beneficiary, Emily Cole, is listed. Emily, of course. I dropped the papers onto the counter and stared out the window at the Pacific, the horizon, a thin, gray line in the distance. Somewhere behind me, the refrigerator hummed indifferent. They'd actually done it. They were willing to drag me into court just to prove a point, that they still had control. By the next morning, I was sitting in a sleek downtown office in Santa Monica across from Evelyn Gray. She was in her early 60s with silver hair cut short and precise glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her desk was stacked with case files, her reputation framed on every wall. She skimmed the documents without comment, her red pen making small, deliberate marks. When she looked up, her expression was calm, but sharp. They're arguing that the house falls under a dormant trust, she said. But that trust expired the moment you divorced your ex-husband. It's a weak claim, but not harmless. They're trying to embarrass me, I said. They don't care about winning. They just want to prove I'm not as independent as I think. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. You're not wrong. This isn't about law. It's about leverage. They want you to react. If you fight publicly, they can frame you as the ungrateful daughter who humiliated her parents. So what do I do? She folded her hands. You do nothing. For now, let me handle the paperwork. Stay silent. The press feeds on emotion. Don't give them any. I nodded, though the thought of staying quiet made my stomach twist. Silence had always been their favorite weapon. 2 days later, the first article hit the news cycle. Lydia Matthews, a financial reporter I knew by name, had written it. CFO flaunts 3M bun, Malibu villa. While parents file lawsuit for ownership, I scrolled through the paragraphs, my job title, my salary range, quotes from anonymous family sources, describing me as distant and difficult. There was even a line about how I cut ties after a failed marriage. Failed marriage. Failed daughter. Failed family. I closed my laptop and exhaled through my teeth. By noon, my phone rang again. David Allen's name flashed on the screen. Madison, he said before I could speak, we need to talk. I figured this call was coming. He hesitated. You know I respect you, but the board's concerned. They don't want Harbor Capital's name associated with, well, with whatever this is. It's a family dispute, I said, keeping my voice even. Nothing to do with the company. Tell that to the internet. I looked at the waves outside, relentless, indifferent. I'm not apologizing for buying a house, David. I earned it. I know you did. Just keep it quiet, please. After the call, I sat on the couch, the lawsuit spread across the coffee table. Each page was stamped and signed, every line, another attempt to pull me back under their control. They weren't just fighting for property. They were fighting to prove that I still belonged to them. The next week, Evelyn called to say there would be a preliminary hearing. You'll need to appear, she said. It's mostly procedural, but expect reporters. They've already picked up the story. She was right. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were lined with photographers and microphones. The air buzzed with questions. Madison, did your parents really fund your house? Are you planning to settle? Do you feel guilty about taking their money? I didn't answer any of them. Evelyn's words echoed in my head. Stay silent. The press feeds on emotion. Inside, I sat beside her, hands clasped tightly in my lap, as the clerk read through the docket. My father's lawyer spoke about family intentions and shared investments. Evelyn's counter-argument was crisp and surgical. She dismantled every claim one by one with calm precision. When the hearing adjourned, we stepped into the corridor where the crowd waited. The reporters swarmed forward again, cameras flashing. Lydia Matthews herself was there, microphone in hand. Ms. Cole, she called out. Do you have anything to say to your parents? For a moment, I considered walking past. Then I stopped. The hallway fell quiet, the kind of silence that only happens when everyone expects you to crack. I met her gaze. I believe in the law, I said, and in silence. Both have power. The words came out steady, but they surprised even me. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward mine, approving. Lydia hesitated, then smiled faintly, sensing the quote she'd just gotten. Thank you, Ms. Cole. We walked out into the sunlight. The crowd parted, cameras still snapping. I kept my chin high, my heartbeat steady. That night, the quote was everywhere. I believe in the law, and in silence. Both have power. Half the internet called me poised. The other half called me cold. Either way, they were talking. I turned off my phone and stood on the balcony of my house, the wind tangling my hair. Somewhere in the distance, the ocean roared against the cliffs. They wanted me to break, but all I felt was stillness, heavy, deliberate, like the pause between lightning and thunder. By February, my name had become public property. I woke up one morning, opened my laptop, and saw my face on half the news feeds in California. Wealthy daughter refuses to share Malibu mansion with family. Christmas drama continues. Underneath the headline was the same picture they always used, me standing on my balcony, sunlight hitting the glass behind me. They'd cropped out the ocean so it looked like I was staring down at the world. I scrolled through the comments until I couldn't anymore. Some people called me greedy. Others said I was brave. One woman wrote, "She's exactly what happens when a daughter stops saying yes." I didn't know whether to thank her or cry. When I got to the office, the air felt different. People smiled too politely, or not at all. Conversations paused when I passed by. At the coffee machine, one of the younger analysts joked under his breath. Guess everyone knows our CFO's living large in Malibu now. I looked up from my mug and said evenly, You forgot to mention the lawsuit. His grin faded and he turned away. The rest of the day passed in a haze of whispers and side glances. When my name came up in a meeting, even my assistant avoided eye contact. By afternoon, I got the message I was expecting: mandatory PR meeting, conference room 4B. David Allen was already there when I walked in, standing at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, expression somewhere between exhaustion and irritation. Next to him were 2 PR executives and a corporate lawyer. A projector displayed a tabloid headline on the wall. Harbor Capital's CFO faces family feud over luxury villa. David gestured for me to sit. Madison, this has gone far enough. Harbor Capital cannot afford to be part of this circus. It's not a circus, I said calmly. It's a lawsuit. Call it what you want, he replied. But public opinion doesn't care about the difference. I've spoken to the board. They're nervous. I suggest you stay out of sight until this settles. I didn't start this, I said. And I'm not going to hide because my family wants attention. The PR manager cleared her throat. Even silence is a message. People think it means guilt. David's eyes met mine. You have every right to defend yourself, Madison. But be strategic. Right now, anything you say will just feed the fire. I folded my hands on the table. I came here to do my job, not to apologize for buying a house. He nodded once, slowly. Then do that. Just don't give anyone more reason to question the company's judgment. When I got home that evening, I felt drained in a way I couldn't name. My phone kept vibrating with alerts. Interviews, think pieces, gossip segments. It was like being trapped inside a story I hadn't agreed to tell. At 7, there was a knock on the door. Samantha stood outside with a pizza box in one hand and a bottle of Pinot in the other.
"You look like someone who forgot what food tastes like," she said. I let her in and we sat on the floor, eating straight from the box. She studied me for a moment. "You should say something. A statement. People are already twisting it." I shook my head. "No, they'll twist that too. Let them talk." She sighed, setting her glass down. "You think silence protects you, but it also isolates you." I looked out at the ocean through the sliding doors, the horizon hidden behind fog. Silence is the only weapon they don't know how to use. Sam didn't argue. She just reached for another slice and said quietly, "Then at least make sure you don't bleed while you're holding it." The next afternoon, I was working from home when the TV in the background caught my attention. My mother's voice. I turned remote in hand. There they were, Robert and Margaret Cole, sitting on the bright white couch of a morning talk show. Mom wore a soft blue sweater, her hair perfectly styled. Dad sat beside her, expression calm, serious, the image of respectable disappointment. The interviewer smiled warmly. "We're so grateful you came on to share your side of things. What's been the hardest part of all this?" Mom's eyes glistened as she reached for a tissue. "The hardest part?" Her voice trembled just enough. "It's knowing that all we ever wanted was family harmony. We love our daughter, but she's changed. We just want peace." The host nodded sympathetically. "So this isn't about money?" Mom shook her head. "No, it's about fairness, about remembering where you came from." She sniffled delicately. "I only hope she realizes that someday." Dad didn't speak. He just stared straight ahead, solemn, the picture of dignified silence. I stood there frozen. The TV light flickered across the room, painting everything in pale blue. Funny, I thought, how easily people can rewrite a story when they control the microphone. They couldn't control me anymore, so they turned me into the villain. I muted the sound and watched their faces move without words. My chest tightened, but I forced myself not to look away. When the segment ended, I switched off the TV. The silence afterward was deafening. For a long time, I stood at the window, the waves pounding the cliffs below. I thought of my father's calm face, my mother's trembling voice. The performance. The lie. When people can't control you, they rewrite you. I turned back to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed my name into the search bar. Pages of results flooded the screen. Articles, opinion pieces, arguments. Some called me cold, others called me an icon. Half the world hated me. The other half wanted to be me. There were threads of strangers debating my character, dissecting my life like it was public property. I scrolled through until I couldn't read anymore. My hands were steady, but my chest ached. I closed the computer and exhaled. Let them talk. Let the noise run its course. The law would speak louder than any of them. The courthouse steps looked like a movie premiere. Reporters, photographers, flashes cutting through the morning haze of downtown Los Angeles. The noise swelled when the doors opened, voices overlapping, calling my name. I kept my head high and didn't respond. The black suit I wore felt like armor. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked inside, each step measured unhurried. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Rows of journalists lined the back benches, whispering as I took my seat beside Evelyn Gray. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a small nod, steady and unflappable. Across the aisle sat my parents, Robert and Margaret Cole, with their attorney, a man I didn't recognize but already disliked. My father's jaw was tight. My mother's eyes darted nervously toward the cameras. When the clerk announced our case, the room shifted, the kind of silence that always comes before spectacle. Robert stood first. His voice was calm, rehearsed the same tone he used when explaining something to people he thought were beneath him. "The purchase of this Malibu property," he said, "was made possible in part by family trust funds that my daughter was managing. She may hold the deed, but the house represents shared family assets." Mom nodded beside him, her expression somewhere between wounded and righteous. "We never wanted to make this public," she said softly. "But she left us no choice." My stomach turned. Evelyn's pen tapped twice against her legal pad, a small signal to breathe. When it was her turn, she stood all steel and precision.
The trust in question, she said, her voice clear, expired in 2020. 3 years before this property was purchased. We have payroll records, tax filings, and closing documents confirming that Ms. Cole financed the home entirely through personal income. There is no legal or financial basis for this claim. The opposing lawyer, a younger man with a smug half-smile, stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, the plaintiffs have submitted amended records indicating that the trust remained active under an extension signed in 2021. Evelyn turned her head slowly, eyebrow raised. Are you suggesting my client's parents forged documents to alter trust dates? The courtroom shifted, a collective inhale. The lawyer hesitated, shuffling his papers. We're saying the timeline is disputed. Evelyn leaned in, her tone cutting. Then perhaps we should subpoena the bank that holds the trust and verify whether this phantom extension exists. Judge Walker, a gray-haired man with a voice like gravel, frowned over his glasses. We'll recess for verification of documents. Counselors, I expect honesty. I won't tolerate manufactured evidence in my courtroom. I watched my father's face tighten. Mom gripped his arm, whispering something, but he wouldn't look at her. When the recess was called, I followed Evelyn out into the hallway. She didn't speak for a few seconds, then said quietly, They're playing with fire. If the judge suspects fraud, this could backfire badly on them. I don't want it to ruin them, I said, surprising myself. I just want them to stop lying. Evelyn looked at me over the rims of her glasses. That's not how liars work. Back inside, the hearing resumed. The judge asked me to speak briefly for the record. My heart was hammering, but when I stood, the noise around me disappeared. Ms. Cole, he said. Do you have anything to add? I met his eyes, then glanced at my parents, my mother's trembling hands, my father's clenched jaw. I don't need to win to be right, I said. I just need them to stop lying. The room went still. Even the clicking cameras fell silent for a moment. Judge Walker gave a slow nod, scribbled something on his pad, and adjourned the session. Outside, the noise returned tenfold. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended like weapons. Evelyn shielded me as we made our way down the courthouse steps. Ms. Cole, do you think your parents fabricated evidence? Are you planning to reconcile? Do you regret posting that photo of your house? I said. Nothing, just kept walking toward the black car, waiting at the curb. The sun was bright, the air sharp. When the door closed behind me, the silence inside the car felt like oxygen. Evelyn exhaled beside me. You handled that perfectly. I don't feel perfect, I said, staring out the window. I feel tired. That's normal, she replied. Truth is exhausting. That night, I sat alone in the living room, laptop open, but unread. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls from reporters, texts from friends, even a voicemail from David telling me to stay composed. I ignored them all. When I finally gave in and opened social media, my breath caught. Someone had uploaded an old video clip, grainy footage from years ago at a family barbecue. My father's voice was unmistakable. Madison only throws those boring parties to show off. Laughter followed. Within hours, the clip spread across every platform. #BoringParty exploded, paired with memes of me in that same balcony photo. Some mocked him. Others defended me. But for once, the tide was turning. Then came the images. Screenshots of my 200 missed calls from months ago, circulating as a symbol of poetic justice. People began using it as shorthand for cutting off toxic family ties. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. I scrolled through the comments until the words blurred. For the first time since this began, the weight pressing on my chest loosened. The internet, unpredictable and cruel as it could be, had chosen sides, and it wasn't his. I closed my laptop and looked toward the sea outside the window. The water glowed silver under the moonlight, steady and endless. Somewhere in that rhythm, I heard the sound of release. The ocean taking back what was never meant to stay buried. 3 weeks later, the headlines changed their tone. My name was no longer at the top of every page. His was. State Bar. Investigates former attorney Robert Cole for document fraud. It was everywhere. Morning news, local radio finance blogs, clips of him walking out of the courthouse played on loop. His expression grim. The same man who once lectured me about dignity and reputation. The man who said image was everything. Now image was all he had left to lose. The investigation moved quickly. Partners from his old firm began distancing themselves, issuing public statements about their shock and disappointment. The firm's website quietly deleted his name from their alumni list. People he'd mentored stopped returning his calls. I watched it unfold from my living room in Malibu, the sound muted, the ocean glimmering outside my window. The television light flickered across the glass coffee table, bouncing off the court documents Evelyn had left last week. Mom wasn't spared either. The Newport Women's Association released a statement about values and ethical representation, followed by a vote that stripped her membership. She went on a local news show 2 days later, tears carefully applied between foundation and mascara. "I only ever wanted peace," she said, her voice trembling, just enough to be believable. "I don't understand why my daughter would do this." The host handed her a tissue. She dabbed her eyes and looked at the camera. "A mother's love never dies, even when her child turns away." I turned the TV off before she could finish. It didn't even make me angry anymore. Just tired. That evening, Evelyn called. "It's over," she said without preamble. "They've officially withdrawn the lawsuit. You won't need to appear again." I sank back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. "So I win. You do," she said. Then after a pause, "But I doubt it feels like it." "No," I said quietly. "No one wins in a family like this." "Take a breath, Madison," she replied gently. "You deserve to rest now." When we hung up, the silence in the house was thick, the kind that echoed. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the sea. The horizon had turned a pale gold, the sun dipping low. For a moment, I thought about calling them, but the thought passed as quickly as it came. The next morning, Nathan showed up at my door. He held a rolled blueprint under his arm, and a coffee in each hand. "Good morning, Miss Malibu," he said with a half-smile. I smiled back, letting him in. "You really should stop calling me that. Can't. It suits you." He set the coffee down and unrolled the paper across the kitchen counter. "I've been thinking, your backyard could use more light. See here, if we add a small garden, the reflection from the pool will catch the sunrise." He pointed to the sketch, tracing lines with his pen. I leaned closer, following the shape of it, the simplicity. "It's beautiful," I said. He shrugged. "You already built the hard part. I'm just helping you let the light in." The words hung in the air longer than either of us expected. He met my eyes, his voice softening. "You know, sometimes it's enough just to let people see how you shine, even if they never say it." I looked down, pretending to study the design again. "I don't think they ever will." "Then that's on them," he said. "Not you." We spent the afternoon outside, clearing a small patch near the pool where he said the light was best. The wind smelled of salt and rosemary from the nearby cliffs. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was easy, peaceful. For once, silence didn't feel like a burden. When the sun began to set, Nathan climbed the short ladder to fix a piece of the patio roof that had come loose. I held the ladder steady, the orange glow painting the glass panels around us. "You ever think about leaving this all behind?" he asked from above. "Sometimes," I said, but then I look at this view and realize it's not the house I needed to run from. It was them. He climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Well, you built something good here. Let it stay that way." I nodded, meaning it. After he left, I poured myself a glass of wine and turned on the TV again. The evening news anchor's voice filled the room. Former attorney Robert Cole, once one of Newport's most respected names, has officially been disbarred following the discovery of falsified trust documents. Cole's wife, Margaret, has also been dropped from several community organizations after public backlash. There was a photo of them on screen, Dad looking smaller somehow, his shoulders heavy and Mom staring straight at the camera, as if daring it to blink first. The anchor continued. When asked for comment, neither responded. I muted the sound. The image lingered frozen in mid-frame. For a long time, I didn't move. My fingers tightened around the glass, the cool stem pressing into my palm. I wasn't proud. I wasn't vindicated. I just felt the quiet weight of something ending. The law had done what I couldn't. It had drawn a line between truth and performance. Justice didn't need me to scream for it. It had a way of finding its own path. Outside, the wind picked up. I set the glass down and stepped onto the terrace. The ocean shimmered under the fading sun, the horizon bleeding into silver. My reflection merged with the light in the glass doors, a shadow and a glow all at once. Justice didn't ask for revenge. It just required letting go. 6 months went by. The storm faded, at least on the surface. My parents disappeared from the headlines, their silence louder than any interview they could have given. The internet found new people to hate, new scandals to chew on, but Emily didn't vanish so quietly. She posted a message on social media one night. I still believe in my family. It was her way of taking their side, maybe of taking a side at all. It didn't go the way she thought it would. The comments were brutal. Your sister stood up for herself. You should try it sometime. You're defending people who ruined their own daughter. Within a week, her account was flooded with insults. Then one morning it was gone entirely. Deactivated, or maybe banned. I didn't think much about it after that. I'd learned to stop refreshing the news, stop wondering what they were doing. My life had become quieter. My days were filled with work weekends with small things that felt like peace, watering the plants, reading on the patio, long walks by the ocean. So when the knock came that morning, I wasn't expecting anyone. It was early. Just after 8, I opened the door and froze. Emily stood on the porch. Her once perfect hair was pulled into a messy bun. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. Or both. She looked smaller somehow, as if she'd shrunk into herself. "Hi," she said, her voice rough. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Of course. She walked in slowly, glancing around the living room like she was seeing it for the first time. Maybe she was. "I don't know where to start," she said. "Try the beginning," I said quietly, leading her toward the patio. We sat outside. The morning sun was soft, the ocean still pale from dawn. I poured 2 cups of tea, one for her, one for me. For a while, neither of us said anything. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm not living with Derek anymore." I nodded, but didn't ask why. She went on anyway. "He left. Said I was too much. I think that's his polite way of saying he found someone else." She gave a weak laugh that cracked halfway through. "Guess it runs in the family, right?" Men leaving when they're bored. I looked down at my tea, then back at her. "I'm sorry, Emily." She shook her head quickly. "Don't be. Her voice faltered. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. For what I said online. For believing them. For not being there." The wind rustled the curtains behind us. I didn't answer right away. She took a shaky breath. "I always thought you were cold. Like you didn't care about anyone but yourself. Mom said you thought you were better than us." I believed her. But when everything fell apart, when people stopped taking their calls, I started to see it. You weren't cold. You were just done trying to be heard. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "I'm so sorry, Mads. I really am." I reached for the teapot, refilling her cup. "You don't owe me an apology." Her head snapped up. "Yes, I do." "No," I said softer this time. "You don't owe me anything. You owe yourself a chance to start over. That's what you should focus on." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. "Mom and Dad are selling the house," she said suddenly. "No one will buy it. Everyone knows. It's like they're cursed now. They can't go anywhere without whispers." I stared out at the water. "That's not my curse to carry." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But it feels like it's still ours. Like no matter what they did, people look at me and see them." I wanted to tell her that she wasn't them, that she could still choose something better. But I knew she had to figure that out on her own. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. "I don't even know if I should have come. I just needed to see you once, without everything between us." I walked to my purse on the counter and took out a small card, Evelyn Gray's business card, slightly worn from being carried around. I held it out to her. "If you need legal help or advice, call her. She's good." Emily took it, her eyes shining. "Thank you." We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure what to do. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. It was quick, awkward, like we were both afraid of being rejected again. I didn't hug her back right away, but as she started to pull away, I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Just enough. Take care of yourself, Emily," I said. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "You too." I watched from the doorway as she walked down the driveway, the sunlight breaking through the morning haze. Her figure grew smaller with each step until she disappeared behind the curve of the road. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't hurt anymore. I went back to the patio and sat down with my tea. The ocean sparkled under the rising sun, calm and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger when I thought of her. Only a strange, soft ache that felt almost like peace. A year later, the air in downtown San Diego felt lighter. Even the way people said my name at Harbor Capital had changed. Less whisper, more respect. The company was celebrating its 40th anniversary. and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged in the building again. The lobby was filled with banners and champagne glasses, a polished orchestra tucked in the corner. I had almost forgotten how to make small talk in heels. As I made my way through the crowd, David Allen spotted me from across the room and walked over, his usual serious expression replaced with something almost proud. "I owe you an apology," he said, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "There was a time I doubted you, Madison. Thought you'd crumble under all that noise." I smiled. "That was a fair bet," he chuckled. "But you didn't. You're stronger than your reputation." "Thank you," I said, "for not giving up on me." "I didn't do anything," he replied. "You did." He handed me a small card envelope, an invitation to the company's private leadership retreat for the coming spring. It wasn't about the event. It was a gesture, a way of saying, "You're back." I tucked it into my clutch. "I'll be there." As I turned to leave, one of the younger analysts who'd once joked about my house caught my eye. He nodded politely, maybe even respectfully. It was a small thing, but I noticed. By the afternoon, I was driving up the coast toward Malibu. The winter sky had that soft, golden haze that always came before sunset. My house waited at the top of the hill, wrapped in quiet light. Inside the kitchen was alive with movement. Samantha arranging flowers, Evelyn uncorking wine, Nathan adjusting candles near the pool. Christmas music played in the background, something jazzy and old-fashioned. The smell of cinnamon and roasted rosemary filled the air. "Finally," Samantha said when she saw me. The woman of the hour. "I brought dessert," I said, holding up a box from my favorite bakery. Nathan looked up from the table settings, smiling. "You didn't have to. You're the host." "I know," I said, "but old habits die hard." He came over, kissed me lightly on the cheek, then went back to lighting the candles. His calm energy grounded me, the same way the ocean did, constant, steady, wordless. Guests arrived one by one. Evelyn greeted everyone with her dry humor, telling Samantha she looked too glamorous for a woman who wins arguments for a living. Nora brought homemade pie and hugged me so tight I almost dropped my wine glass. A few colleagues from Harbor Capital came too, people I trusted enough to let into my world. As the night deepened, the pool reflected the string lights above, turning the whole patio into a moving picture of gold and silver. We ate by the water, laughter drifting into the cool air. I sat back for a moment, watching them talk, the sound of the waves syncing perfectly with their voices. The warmth of it all crept in, slowly filling a space I hadn't realized was still empty. A year ago, I'd sat alone in this house, eating takeout, staring at a Christmas tree meant for no one. Now it was alive with light and people who actually saw me. I thought about my parents, about the house they'd lost, the silence that had followed. But for the first time, the thought didn't sting. Last year, I ate Christmas dinner alone. This year, I don't need anyone with my blood to remind me I belong. Later, Nathan handed me a glass of champagne. "You okay, I am," I said. And I meant it. Samantha raised her glass. To Madison, she announced, standing near the pool, the woman who made justice and peace sit at the same table. The others laughed and joined the toast. I could feel my cheeks flush, but I didn't look away. "To peace," I said softly. Nathan squeezed my hand under the table. "You earned it." I leaned closer, my voice barely a whisper. Maybe peace was the fight all along. He smiled, eyes reflecting the candlelight. When the clock struck 10, someone turned off the music, and for a moment there was only the sound of the ocean. Then faintly at first, fireworks began from somewhere down the beach. We all stepped outside to watch. Bright colors burst over the water, flickering on the glass of the pool. Samantha cheered. Evelyn laughed, and Nathan's arm brushed mine as we stood side by side. I tilted my head back, the sky blooming in gold and red above me. The cold air touched my face, but I didn't shiver. Somewhere between the sound of laughter and the hiss of fireworks, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. The night stretched on calm and bright. I smiled, just enough, and let the light fill the silence. The next morning, the sun spilled gold over the cliffs of Malibu. The house was still quiet, filled with the faint scent of last night's candles and sea salt. I woke before Nathan padded barefoot into the kitchen and made coffee. The sound of the machine humming felt comforting, like the heartbeat of a life finally calm. Outside, the wind was soft, brushing through the white curtains that framed the balcony. I carried my mug to the terrace and let the first light of Christmas morning warm my face. Down in the yard, Nathan was tossing a tennis ball to our golden retriever Charlie, both of them running along the edge of the pool. The sight made me smile. I sat down in the wooden chair overlooking the ocean and opened my phone. One new message. The name on the screen stopped me. Dad. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I tapped. We're sorry. Merry Christmas, Madison. I read it twice. There was no explanation, no confession, no mention of what they had done. Just that single line. An olive branch too small, too late. But still a branch. I took a long sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my hands. Then pressed delete. The message vanished. They once said I threw parties to show off. They never understood that I was just trying to live without apology. I wasn't performing. I was surviving. I put the phone away, wrapped a light sweater around my shoulders, and stepped off the porch toward the sand. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, its rhythm steady, its patience eternal. I walked along the shoreline, letting the cold water kiss my feet, the foam dissolving around my ankles. Each step left an imprint that the waves quickly erased. For the first time, I didn't mind disappearing traces. Not everything needed to be remembered. A few of the neighbors were out already, a couple walking their dog, an older man collecting shells, a young girl running with her kite. When they waved, I waved back. There was no awkwardness, no pretense, just small moments of ordinary peace. As I kept walking, the sun rose higher, turning the water a deeper blue. I thought about all the versions of myself that had stood on this beach before. The angry one, the broken one, the lonely one, waiting for someone to call. I thought about that Christmas, when I sat alone, wineglass in hand, pretending not to care that they were half a world away. I wasn't her anymore. By the time I got back to the house, Nathan had already finished feeding Charlie. He was sitting on the back steps with 2 mugs of coffee watching the waves. When he saw me, he smiled and held one out. "Morning, Malibu," he said. "Morning." I answered, sitting beside him. The dog curled up between us, warm against my legs. The sound of the surf rolled in slow and steady. For a while, we didn't say anything. I took a sip and looked out at the horizon. The light danced across the water, scattering into 1,000 tiny sparks. "You know, I said finally, this is the first Christmas morning I've ever had that felt exactly right." He turned to me. "Because it's quiet, because it's honest." Nathan nodded. "You've earned that." I smiled, leaning back against the railing. "The only Christmas gift I needed was this," I said softly. "Freedom from waiting." He reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. The simple gesture said everything words couldn't. The gulls circled overhead, their cries sharp but distant like echoes from another life. The world beyond this place, lawsuits, headlines, the noise of judgment, felt small, almost unreal. What was left was sunlight, laughter, and the steady rhythm of the tide. I looked at Nathan, at the home I'd built at the ocean that had witnessed every piece of my undoing and rebuilding. For years I thought happiness was something people gave you or took away. Now I knew it was something you allowed yourself to have. The wind picked up again, tossing a strand of hair across my face. Nathan brushed it back. "They called me selfish," I said quietly. And maybe I was. But maybe selfish just means choosing peace over permission. He smiled. "I'd say that's a good definition." We sat there until the coffee went cold, the morning stretching out in front of us. The waves rose and fell like a heartbeat that belonged to both of us. They called me arrogant. They said I was showing off, but all I ever did was start living, for myself. And maybe that's the only kind of forgiveness that matters, learning to stop needing someone else to see your worth. The world behind me, the noise, the hurt, the endless explanations, had quieted. What remained was light. If you've ever been told you're too much just for being yourself, remember this. You're not shining too bright. You're just finally standing in your own sun,